Today, perhaps, there are three major challenges in securing medical and healthcare technology. First, healthcare organizations rely heavily on legacy devices, some 10 to 15 years old, running outdated or unsupported operating systems with minimal cybersecurity features. Second, there's been a dramatic rise in device connectivity. While older equipment used limited wired or early generation wireless links, most new devices now ship with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, or even 5G capabilities, greatly expanding the attack surface. Third, the growth of at-home care and remote patient monitoring pushes medical devices outside the controlled hospital network into home networks and cloud environments, introducing risks hospitals can't directly oversee. Threats span both legacy and modern devices, with examples such as malware found on MRI machines. However, the most common and damaging threat today is ransomware. And these aren't sophisticated attacks. Attackers frequently purchase stolen hospital credentials on the dark web, bypassing technical defenses entirely. Despite all this, you have to do something, right? These are human lives that depend on the machines functioning correctly. So, in the US and in other countries, medical devices are being held to a much higher standard. These are on new devices coming on the market, and they must have SBOMs, they must include encryption, and they must update their software, and they must document the end of life. And so, as much as I've been skeptical about cyber trust marks and other labels on devices, I think it might just work with medical devices. This is a story about how diversity in healthcare complicates segmentation, security controls, and zero trust approaches. While large hospitals may segment their networks, many exposure points still remain. I'm Robert Famosi. This is Error Code.
I am Bob Lyle. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Medcrypt, which is a medical device cybersecurity company. And in my spare time, I'm the chair of the device security group of the GSMA, which I've held that role for about the last 6 years as well.
GSMA stands for Global System for Mobile Communications Association. It's a global organization that represents the interests of the mobile network operators.
Yes, so the GSMA represents all of the mobile operators globally. So I think there's over 800 mobile operators globally that are in that consortium, and many other companies are part of that mobile ecosystem. So you'll have companies like Microsoft, Google, Qualcomm, et cetera, third-party software providers. So earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time in the mobile industry. And I find it fascinating now as there is a significant overlap of the mobile industry with the healthcare and medical device industry. So, my day job is in medical device cybersecurity, but there is a lot of connectivity there and a lot of overlap to important considerations in mobile device cybersecurity and IoT security. So I find that useful.
GSMA, they're the ones that come up with 5G and all the standards that go around that.
Yes, the GSMA is kind of maybe most known for, I tell people, like if you're at a neighborhood party, I mentioned that, hey, when you travel around the world, your calls don't drop when you go from country to country. So they do define standards around interoperability and handoff and roaming. They also issue the eSIMs or the EID for phones. So basically the phone numbers you get around the world, the subscriber initiator for that is the GSMA. So
Bob mentioned that GSMA is related to his day job, so maybe we could pick up on that. How do these devices communicate? And in some cases, whether they're using 5G to do their communication or earlier GS standards, such as 2G.
Yes, and actually you hit on a key point. So I like to mention to people, I know you cover a lot of different verticals and industry segments, and you do a lot of work in the OT space. I find medical and healthcare is somewhat unique, even though I'm sure each sector, each vertical has their own challenges, is in the healthcare and medical device segment. You've got a lot of legacy devices. So a lot of devices 10 to 15 years old or older. As a personal anecdote story, I was in hospital a few times recently with a daughter who gets injured. We're in the urgent care, emergency room. I'm looking around. Some of these things look pretty antiquated. Now, there's obviously also new devices, but there are devices that are 10 or 15 years old or older. So there are a lot of legacy devices that are running maybe unsupported OSs or have no cybersecurity capabilities at all. A second big factor with the healthcare medical device segment is a lot of connected devices. And maybe that's the case in other segments as well with IoT devices, but it's been a massive upsurge in the number of connected devices. So 15 years ago, devices in the healthcare setting may not have been connected at all, wired and plugged in, et cetera. Now that's, more than 50% or 75% of new devices have some connectivity, whether that's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or cellular. And as you mentioned, older devices would have 2G, 3G connectivity, et cetera. Now, most of the medical device makers we talk to, every little startup is going to have 5G backup and Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or proprietary MIMO or other technologies. And the third big trend I'll maybe mention or uniqueness about the healthcare segment is a massive upsurge in at-home care or remote patient monitoring or things outside the traditional hospital firewall or hospital environment. And so today you have a lot of devices that are managed, outside on a personal home network, maybe even managed or controlled with a personal phone. So there you've got all sorts of security concerns that go outside of what a hospital or healthcare environment can even look into exactly. So as a trivia point, I was at a dinner in New York City, and it was related to kind of med tech startups or medical device or healthcare startups. And I think 7 out of the 10 startups were all remote patient monitoring of some form. And a lot of that started because of COVID, but then since has just taken on since then. So now you've moved to outside the hospital environment, cloud environments, and the hospital is moving to put everything in the cloud to work also with that remote care. So greatly increasing the attack surface across the board with all that connectivity. So.
In my opinion, medical or healthcare organizations that I've talked to, there's a sheer diversity of devices. When you're looking at a manufacturing plant, maybe there's a couple PLCs. There's a few things that are predictable.
And so that's a very important point. I was actually just speaking to a colleague of mine, Axel Worth, who's actually published some books on medical device cybersecurity. He's our chief security strategist, but he actually gave me an interesting quote yesterday. We were talking about this, that it is such a diverse array of devices. So not to stereotype or simplify things, but at a chemical plant or manufacturing plant, they may have many different devices, as you said, but in general, they might have a few different types of PLCs or controllers or different types of monitoring or sensing equipment. In the medical healthcare ecosystem, you may have vast arrays of different things from small, insulin pumps or blood analyzer devices, et cetera, up to large capital equipment, MRI machines, X-ray machines, other things, oncology treatment devices, et cetera. And so there's only, I think he had an interesting phrase, there's small islands of homogeneity in an inhomogeneous environment in general. So you have a large array of different types of devices. And so your attack surface is quite large. And so the controls you might put in place to protect one device, put it on a secured network with some zero trust, et cetera, that might not really apply for another area where that environment has to be opened up. These are insulin pumps controlled by people, and they're connected to their mobile phones. Then you have some remote patient monitoring of the hospital environment has to also be able to monitor those devices as well. So you have a myriad of places where things can break down. So if you're a security professional in a hospital, it's kind of, I highly suggest layered defenses of doing, zero trust, secure by design, et cetera, and having multiple layers of defenses because you're not going to be ensured that all of them will remain strong.
So I ask this question of just about everybody, but are healthcare organizations flat or segmented? If I were to gain access to the network remotely, could I plunder different departments, say the surgical theater, or is that separate from the pharmacy or for the cafeteria?
To be honest, I think a very good question. I think that depends on the large hospital. So the larger the hospital, they may do a better job of segmenting each of those departments. So oncology, from surgical robotics and others. I think in a larger hospital setting will be segmented. There are always concerns, though, that if you break into one part, you can break into another. I sometimes use this sensationalist story, sounds like something out of a movie. Maybe you've had this before, but when I do a conference presentation, I sometimes show a picture of a fish tank, and you may be familiar with 2017, I think it was Darktrace reported at different industry conferences like Black Hat or DEF CON that one of the largest casinos in the world in Vegas was hacked by a bad actor. And I thought it was a pretty novel idea, hacking into the temperature sensor within the fish tank in the lobby, and then getting inside the network and exfiltrating a bunch of data. Fascinating story. Sounds like something out of a James Bond movie, but that actually shows you an example of how obviously they didn't think that they were susceptible to being hacked by their fish tank in the lobby. But in a hospital environment, you may have many different segmented networks, but a lot of those are going to have exposure points, printers or other things or admin facilities. And there are the possibilities for malware to be introduced to devices. And so a lot of different points of attack.
So staying with the threat landscape, we've got legacy devices, some of which are traditionally connected. Maybe they're hardwired to a network. And then you've got these new devices that are coming in, and from a threat perspective, they're all over the place. Where, as a hospital administrator, should I be focused? The legacy device that I forgot about? Are they going to be a problem? Or is it with the newer technologies that weren't even thought of when we built the network?
Also a good question. I think there's no easy answer there is probably, sadly, I would say both. You're going to have to, if you're going to prioritize, I don't know that I would want to take the risk of putting all my eggs in one basket, but you're going to have old devices that need to be updated. I think there's different stats I saw of 6% up to 12% of devices still are running on unsupported OSs or outdated OSs without security features that are in place in hospitals today. So those at a minimum need to all be updated. But obviously I know the hospital's running, you're providing treatment to patients is the highest priority. And so that might be hard to swap out. It may be easier if you say the priority is any new device meets, not only FDA criteria for cybersecurity, which, they keep raising the bar on that, which I think is a good thing. But using your own requirements within the hospital of secure by design, seeing documentation from the medical device manufacturers, having software bills of materials for everything, monitoring those on a continuing ongoing basis. So these are all either requirements or recommendations from the FDA, but at least having that as a minimum bar. And then looking in particular at the mobile threat landscape and the cloud threat landscape as two other vectors that may not be fully covered by everything coming from the FDA to protect the environment. So there haven't been many cases of this being exploited, but there is evidence that devices can be compromised. There was one public information from FBI in 2020. There was a public briefing from the FBI, but it kind of got lost in the noise of many other things going on about the Quampiers malware, which was a malware from a threat actor group that was found to be on MRI machines.
The Quampiers malware is interesting. It was a remote access Trojan, or RAT, and in 2020, the FBI identified a group named Orangeworm that targeted healthcare providers with the Quampiers, which was found on X-ray and MRI machines. The group seemed particularly interested in network reconnaissance and understanding how the devices themselves operated, rather than stealing patient data directly.
There are examples of how threat actors can get inside the network and put in malware on devices. So again, layered approach and looking at all the different angles of protecting devices.
I've talked to a few people recently that have talked about the ancillary devices, not what we would commonly think as cyber targets. For example, patient information wristband printers within the healthcare organization can be attacked from the outside. Or the HVAC system can take out an entire data center. Or the smart elevators can be DDoSed in an office building. These are things that are often outside of the traditional cyber world. My point, in most people's minds, when you're talking about healthcare organizations, they are vaguely aware of these things, but are they concerned about it? Or is it just something that is lower on the list because they're worried more about their infusion pumps or the traditional things in their world?
There are a lot of concerns for the head of security of a healthcare organization with, the traditional IT network, as you mentioned, may not get full consideration of how to secure that. I've interestingly, in speaking to the like CISOs of large hospitals, we talk sometimes about the threats that exist, like malware could be placed onto your MRI machine, or someone could hack into the printer as one example, and thus then gain access inside the network. Interestingly, though, those CISOs point out, and you've probably seen the rise in ransomware attacks, in particular on the healthcare sector. FBI, I think in April, their internet crime report had healthcare was by far the number one most targeted vertical for bad actors, which is not a great thing. But those CISOs of hospitals point out to me that they can do all these different protections for different things, but that the reality is that if you're a bad actor and want to somehow, conduct a ransomware attack or attack a hospital, that you could try to do, go through the printer or place malware onto large capital equipment. But today it's actually sadly much easier to just buy off the dark web the login credentials of a hospital administrator or someone inside the network. But today it's actually sadly much easier to just buy off the dark web the login credentials of a hospital administrator or someone inside the network, and boom, you're inside the network by logging in cleanly using, dark web passwords, and then conduct a ransomware attack from that. And unfortunately, that vertical, normally pays out. And so if you're a bad actor, targeting a healthcare network, on average, it's like 5 million is a payout from a ransomware attack, because that industry can't afford to be down, both, potential loss of life or damage to patients. There's reputational damage and loss of functionality and different things. So a lot of problems there. So I think their number one worry for those hospital CISOs is ransomware attacks and disruption of service. And so they've got a list of things they've got to do to protect against that, which maybe that can be beefed up. And then on top of that, they need to look at, securing the traditional OT network, the HVAC and power and other things. So it's a lot of concerns there. I do think the easiest route, as you pointed out, the bad actors, criminals, most of the time they're financially motivated. Now, there may be nation state attackers and other things that may have other reasons to do things, and that's a scary, sobering thought about things that can happen there. Some that I've worked with in the cybersecurity space always point out you can't really, almost nothing will stop a fully motivated nation state level attacker. You have to just plan that might happen and have, plans in place to deal with it. For most bad actors or criminals, though, they're financially motivated and they do want the easiest route to collect that. And so sadly, it probably is, scraping the dark web, buying credentials off the dark web. If a bad actor wants to target a hospital organization, they can probably find credentials to someone that works in that hospital organization on the dark web. So I highly recommend, healthcare organizations should have in place different dark web monitoring tools and be monitoring on their own proactively to see if any of their employees' credentials show up on the dark web, even if any of their employees' personal credentials show up on the dark web, because then though that person could in theory be compromised, and they can take some preventative measures there. They should also, I do worry, and in kind of fireside chats with others in the industry, kind of like we're having here, that I do worry at some point some bad actors may be more motivated to show off of being the best in their profession or the best in their space or to try the new challenge. And so I figure 95% of bad actors will take the easy route of let's just get some credentials to someone that works there, break in and conduct a ransomware attack, or even just get inside and monitor what's going on for a while and do a phishing campaign or whatever you want to do. But I do think that some bad actors may be motivated to kind of set the bar for what can be done. So I do worry that some bad actors may want to show, hey, we can hack into a hospital environment and we can get inside an X-ray machine or MRI machine and shut it down. Obviously, a ransomware attack could then be even more robust from that view if they're like, hey, we can actually shut down the physical equipment. That would cause a hospital to then take things offline and go to remediate. And it may take, I've seen different CISOs of hospitals do kind of example stories of how they have combated ransomware attacks. So sometimes they may be down for days or weeks or months to get systems back in place that they can trust. So I do worry that at some point a bad actor will do that 0-day attack or try to take something down on purpose to make a statement and set the bar for what can be done.
Bob mentioned earlier defense in depth, And with OT devices, I find that you can't always put those things on the device itself, but you can do security controls on top of that.
Yes. So I think with the FDA has a lot of guidelines for medical device manufacturers, and I think a hospital, it would be helpful if hospitals, push down on their medical device manufacturers to meet and exceed, the FDA requirements. And obviously, I know the FDA sets the minimum bar. The manufacturers should use, secure coding technologies and secure kind of hardening technologies, OS hardening technologies, as well as they do designs. They should follow the Secure Product Development Framework guidelines, and I think NIST and UL and others have different guidelines there for secure product development. The FDA is now requiring that, as well as they're requiring labeling, and as part of their labeling initiatives, software bills of materials and SBOM. So I think that's great to monitor potential issues with open source code and third-party code. And I'm sure you're very familiar with the log4js and other incidents of the world where that can take down lots of different equipment at one time. So I do think one of the easiest avenues for a bad actor is through supply chain security. If you want to target a hospital outside of logging in through some admin's credentials, is conduct a supply chain attack and take down one of those vendors, even if it's the HVAC supplier or something else. The elevator supplier or other things, and to ruin equipment within the hospital. So I think you need to have secure coding principles, OS hardening, use a secure product development framework, keep on hand documentation for all of that, and then have software bills of materials to show the provenance of your code and monitoring of third-party code going into the hospital. And then on an ongoing basis, I don't think they have it today, but I do think at some point in the future, larger hospitals will have a database of the SBOMs of all of their products. So when there is a next Log4j or anything like that, OpenSSL issue, the hospital would immediately know themselves, outside of having to even reach out to the MDMs. They would know themselves, hey, we've got a few thousand different pieces of equipment here. We see that issue is in 20 of them. We can work with those medical device manufacturers to take care of that. So I don't know. So I think those would be the main steps I would recommend. SBOMs and the secure product development framework, OS hardening, secure coding techniques. And the other, I guess, one area, especially because of all the connectivity, is secure cryptography. As an anecdote, I think in the FDA guidance, there is a call out specifically to the acronym SBOM, a certain number of times, 10 or 15 times or something. There's much more reference to secure authentication, secure identification, cryptography. And we haven't gotten to this topic yet, but at some point there will be post-quantum computers. Some of that is a little bit of hype and hubbub now, but it is factual that the U.S. government has issued guidance, and there are agencies around the world that have issued guidance that, hey, in 2030 we need to do this, and 2035 need to do that. So as another element of that recommendation for guidance is that everything needs to be post-quantum capable or post-quantum ready at this point, because you don't want to introduce a device that a lot of times, as we discussed, is going to have to last 10 or 15 years and have to retrofit that later. So
we've talked about large healthcare organization. Does Bob's company work with smaller organizations, say the physician around the corner with a solo practice?
The company I'm with, Medcrypt, we do work with some of the large, top 10, top 20 medical device makers. And those are interesting and exciting partners. But we do also work with a lot of startup companies. So there are a lot of medical device companies that we work with that are, 2 people or 10 people or 20 people that are making a device. And a lot of those times it's in the hope of their device will be proven, and they most likely, as an exit, would probably get acquired by one of those larger companies, because you're probably familiar with the big guys, the big 10 or 20. Half of their strategy is just acquiring other companies to become a new business unit or product line, of that company. So we work with companies from large to small. And actually, as you may appreciate, the smaller the company, the more they need someone's help in regulatory approval. Large companies will have a lot of people with job titles of, vice president of regulatory approvals or regulatory affairs, and teams of people that help with FDA submissions at a large company. And they may even have or actually probably will have people in Washington, D.C. that liaise with the FDA or health government officials, et cetera. So smaller companies, we do provide services to help them with FDA submissions. But I think the smaller the company, I've talked to quite a few startups where they don't have anyone in-house who knows much about, government regulations or FDA submissions. So whether they use us or someone else, they need a third party to help with that documentation, threat modeling, as well as pen testing and other things that they wouldn't be able to do internally.
Can you go to a third party that's certified and have that device meet the requirements and therefore be certified?
Good question. I think the FDA is the only entity that kind of reviews the submission, whether it's a 510(k) submission or there's an electronic process now, the E-Star process. So people submit their pre-market approval submissions to the FDA electronically with a bunch of documentation. Only the FDA reviews that. I think as a requirement within that, you will need pen testing or kind of to validate that your device has been secured. That testing has to be done or should be done independently. So that isn't done by the FDA. And I don't know that they actually attack devices or test against devices, but they will review all the documentation to see that all the right controls were in place, the right software bill of materials was provided for that. And if it's a cyber device at all, and you may have seen there's a bunch of kind of jokes floating around on LinkedIn or the internet about if it's anything beyond a tongue depressor, it's a cyber device. So if it has one line of code and any connectivity at all, even if that's a USB port or something, it's a cyber device. And so that needs a software bill of materials. You'll then need to show that you've validated the design. So pen testing results from some independent party would be ideal. So, and sometimes I have seen examples of a company will submit a device and say, hey, here's what we did for cryptography, or here's what we did for this or that. And they may go back and FDA may go back and ask questions about, hey, we need an independent third party, not you, to say, not you, large medical device maker, to say this thing is cryptographically secure, as an example. And so then that large medical device maker will have to hire an outside firm to do it, because it would be kind of like, you and I taking a test and saying we did a great job, self-grading ourselves. And so, anyways, FDA will require those results. Sometimes they'll trust, hey, here's our product, here's our SBOM, here's our pen test results. Sometimes the FDA will dig into that a little deeper and be like, we need another independent third party results here to validate what you say.
I know for ISO certifications, there's TUV in Germany that does certifications for organizations, and they're independent. I was just curious. It seems like Bob puts together the entire package, whether needing a pen test or demonstrating the full life cycle or end of life for that device.
Yes. So we'll do, for our customers, we can do everything, and I'm sure other companies can do a similar model, but we'll do everything from writing all the documentation, preparing the threat models, helping with the software bill of materials. We have a product that does the monitoring of software bills of materials. You also have to show a post-market vulnerability plan with your submission. So you can't just say, hey, here's our device, we're submitting it, and we're never going to monitor this again. So the FDA requires that you show a plan for post-market. So we have a product, a software bill of materials management product and vulnerability monitoring product that can help monitor that product into the future. So 24/7 scanning of the product. So we'll help with everything around that submission, package it up, as far as showing all the documentation, threat models, secure designs were done, cryptography is in place, pen test results are there, software bill of materials is there, and we're showing a plan for how we're monitoring into the future, so you don't need to worry about us. There is the chance FDA could, a year or 2 years or some time in the future, audit the device. You have to show the plan there. We will do that 100%, or we offer, as one of my colleagues mentions, we teach you to fish method, where we'll actually show a company, whether it's a large company or a startup of a few people, we'll show them and teach them how to do it so that for their next device submission, they can do it on their own. So we'll work with partners to train them on being cyber capable themselves so that any future, FDA, E-Star submissions, they can write them on their own, or we can do all the grunt work ourselves and prepare everything and just kind of show it to them and package it up and send it off. And a lot of companies want to learn, so that they're kind of self-capable in the future. So we'll kind of teach them.
Bob is also interested in labeling cybersecurity, in particular, the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark. So I remain very skeptical because years ago I worked at a company that was partnering with UL. UL was going to certify IoT devices. Well, that program never really took off. And when I hear about the trust mark, if I understand it correctly, you would have a barcode on the device, and it would require the person to actually go and visit the website for the most recent information about that device, which, because it's on a printed box, I guess I appreciate the timeliness of it, but this extra step, the consumer, they're not really educated to do that. They're just going to grab something off the shelf and go home.
The newest FDA guidance recently has the phrase labeling in it, but that's more around documentation. You've probably seen, there's U.S. Cyber Trust Mark for consumer devices, consumer-facing devices. There's UK PSTI and EU CRA and different things. In Singapore is kind of the leader in that space now, that they had a cybersecurity labeling scheme, but they did introduce, I think it was last year, a medical device, sub-variant of that. So in Singapore, there is a medical device cybersecurity labeling scheme and kind of a rating of 1 to 4 stars, I think. Outside of Singapore, some effort in Finland and Germany in particular in having some efforts at a national level around labeling. In the US, as you're probably familiar, the Cyber Trust Mark got a lot of press. I think it was in January this year when that launched. Um, I'm a big fan personally of the idea of labeling schemes, even though in the US that doesn't cover, US Cyber Trust Mark doesn't cover medical devices at all. The reason I bring it up is there is an important kind of intersection of overlap, that there are lots of things that are applicable to the medical healthcare ecosystem that are not medical devices, that so may fall under US Cyber Trust Mark, for example, uh, like blood storage refrigerators and things like that in a hospital, or people's personal mobile phones or other things might not fall under FDA guidance, but could fall under kind of consumer guidance and things like Cyber Trust Mark. So I'm a fan of the idea of if those can proliferate, and if the use of labeling schemes can continue, I think that's a good thing for the industry and the ecosystem, and may help raise kind of consumer awareness around those things. But at the moment, FDA kind of governs what is approved or not approved for hospital use, but there are a lot of edge cases of things that could be in a hospital that aren't really a medical device, but they're kind of close, like the refrigerators that store blood, that's not there covered, but that's kind of an important item. And so there's a lot of different fringe cases there. So I do think it could be good for the world globally if we move to a place where, think about as a consumer, when I was in the urgent care or emergency room with our daughter who gets injured, and I'm looking around, it'd be nice as a consumer if I could see that equipment had a green check with a 5 star, and that one had a green check with a 4 star, and then I look over and that thing has a yellow check mark with 3 stars. It might raise some awareness or cause concern of, like, why is that cybersecurity rating not as high?
Right.
Anyway, so I think in general the idea of cybersecurity labels is good. Maybe there'll be more momentum to either have medical devices fall under those, or have some areas where consumer awareness can be raised. And at some point, maybe the FDA would have interest in having a consumer-facing cybersecurity label at some point. I do think it would be in the best interest of hospitals, possibly, to have that, where a hospital could promote that, hey, we've got all, 5 star green, 5 star, security labeling on all of our devices. Um, at the moment, people can, I guess, rest knowing that the behind the scenes, there is a minimum bar set by FDA, so everything in that hospital should be at that minimum bar. But it could be good at some point if there was consumer awareness around the cybersecurity of devices in the hospital setting.
And even if we brought in the cyber trust mark right now, there's probably going to be a 10-year gap between now and when we're going to see people routinely walk into an ER and go, oh yeah, they've got a 5 star rating on their devices. This is awesome. I love this hospital.
Right. No, that's a very good point. It would be the tech savvy or early adopter people, but you're right. It's probably a 5 or 10 year gap before the average person's like, I'm going to scan this barcode. The other example, I was forgetting it, but previously, was like security cameras. at a hospital, or even just cameras at all at a hospital, they would potentially have that cyber trust mark on them, not falling under FDA guidance as a medical device, along with the fridges that hold blood or something. But you are right. Today, the average consumer is not going to do that, but I'm hopeful that at some point, barcodes are becoming more common for different things, whether you're supposed to pay your bill or get information on this concert. Now I see barcodes everywhere. As a security person, most of the time I never scan any of them because I'm assuming they're all a hack. You've probably seen the different stories about like parking meters where there's a barcode, and I have seen stories or heard of stories where criminals put a sticker over it with a bad barcode that takes you to some malware site. So anyways, at some point I do hope the environment gets to where the average person's like, oh, okay, I'll scan this device, or this, I see this device in the hospital, yes, let me see what's up with that. But today I do believe there's a bit of a gap for the average person not doing that.
I'd like to thank Bob Lyle for coming on the show and talking about Medcrypt and the work that they're doing to help certify devices in healthcare organizations today. Hey, if you're enjoying Error Code, tell a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there who like narrative information security podcasts. And I'd really like to hear from you. Go to errorcodepodcast.com to get more details. And tell me what you like, and even what you don't. I've got some great episodes coming up. We'll have more on Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and hacking utilities supply chains. Subscribe today. I don't want you to miss out.